Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today with my fellow speakers here. It's a great pleasure, and it's great to get updated on your work. I always read the updates, but I rarely have the opportunity to join the conversation on Zoom. So it's really interesting to hear what's going on. I think many of us had hoped that this spring leaders meeting would become the first step in a year-long process, which could lead to a real turning point in U.S. China relations and inducing China to move in the right direction in areas that would benefit the United States. There is a potential for meeting 4 times this year, but it's unlikely to happen. I think 2 would be great if we were able to achieve it, an exchange of leaders' visits. But the fact that both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump are our personalistic leaders, of course, presents risks, but also means that these leaders have the latitude to open what Joe Nye called the funnel of choice, to really turn things around, to have room to maneuver and to make mutual compromises to stabilize relations. And of course, my own experience in the State Department from 97 to 2000 was a period when we did have the exchange of leaders' visits. You know, we often, people who've worked in government, we often observe that sometimes relations between US and China have to get really bad before the two sides invest the kind of effort on diplomatic engagements to improve relations. And so I've seen for myself how it can work, in which the professionals from the two governments put in hours of diplomatic efforts negotiating with one another before the leaders meet. And they, at that time, they set specific leader-level priorities, learn what the priorities of the other side are, and start making some compromises. And this process also helps them learn a lot about one another, which does create a good foundation for subsequent problem solving. So ideally, at this first meeting in April, but now in May, the leaders would set the agenda for the year, identify their priorities, and then instruct their systems, their bureaucracies, to tee up the outcomes for their priority areas ahead of the next meeting. And this would facilitate interagency coordination on the two sides and staff level negotiations with counterparts, Chinese counterparts with American counterparts in 3 key areas: economics and trade, national security, and the people-to-people relations. But I now, as you know, a person who's naturally optimistic, but I am feeling more pessimistic about this May visit, going beyond, say, the minimum of extending the Busan truce achieved at the Korea meeting that froze America's China-specific tariffs and the expansion of American technology export restrictions to any entity owned 50% or more by any firm on the existing entity list and defense risk lists, in exchange for China's moratorium on the rare earth exports. Now, it's possible that we could get some more progress on trade to fulfill the obligations of Trump 1 Phase 1 trade agreement and some beginnings of Phase 2 discussions, which address more structural reform issues. It could mean that we get some progress on welcoming Chinese investment on fair terms to the United States with careful attention to security protections. And maybe China would announce some carefully scoped investment projects that support U.S. manufacturing. That would be a big achievement if we were able to get that. But unfortunately, I don't see any sign of progress on issues beyond trade and investment, even though there are quite a few specific issues related to national security. And I could list some of them which potentially should be discussed and possibly achieved. And also on the people-to-people side, return to regular exchanges of academics and students, including name-checking Fulbright and China Scholarship Council, and reciprocal issuance of visas for legitimate journalists. I mean, losing the opportunity to discuss the security issues and the people-to-people issues really would be tragic, and also dangerous in that the Chinese side, of course, is very focused on Taiwan. And I don't see any indication that the United States is prepared for how to address the Taiwan issue, which means there's some risk that once the two leaders get in the room, you could get some improvisation on the part of President Trump that would not be in U.S. interests or in the interests of a peaceful Asia-Pacific region. So I think it would have been important to develop an approach on Taiwan that would give Xi Jinping something he could call a win, but which is consistent with past U.S. policy and reduces the risk of conflict in the Taiwan Strait. So the reason for my low expectations here, my atypical pessimism, is that not just the Iran war, which has created this global economic crisis and plummeting trust in American leadership throughout the world, while China calmly is sitting on the sidelines, winning respect for its strategic restraint, and Xi Jinping's prescience in strengthening self-reliance in energy and supply chains. But also, and this is so important, the lack of preparation for these meetings, which I view as really diplomatic malpractice. There have been several meetings at the cabinet level led by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, but almost nothing at the sub-cabinet level or by the professionals in the State Department, Defense Department, and National Security Council. I met with Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for North America, Tsai Wei, in November, and he was extremely frustrated that he hadn't been able to visit DC. He could hardly figure out who his counterpart was. And, you know, the NSC Asia staff is thinned out to really almost no one. I visited Ivan Kanapathy in December, and that NSC Asia staff, which in the Biden administration, people had their desks piled on top of one another. There were so many people working on Asia, but now there's hardly anybody there, and they're all reluctant to get out ahead of President Trump. So I don't think they're proposing suggestions up. Everything is top down. The US system has become almost as centralized or even more centralized than China's is. So people don't seem to know what President Trump wants to achieve in that meeting and what Xi Jinping wants to achieve. So I think the lack of preparation is the most worrisome feature, and the reason that I'm hoping that at least we get to sustain the truce that was achieved at the Busan meeting, but I don't have high expectations that we'll get much beyond there.